I was 74 slides into my presentation when the notification popped up on my screen, right there, in front of our potential 74 million client. While I was sharing my screen on Zoom, Isla, please check your email regarding the termination of your employment, effective immediately, HR. For 3 heartbeats, I froze. The text hovered there like a digital slap across my face, visible to everyone in the meeting. Then muscle memory took over. I clicked the notification closed, smiled at the camera, and continued my pitch without missing a beat. So as you can see, gentlemen, the integration pathway we're proposing for Solvitech would reduce your operational redundancies by approximately 32% in the first year alone, with compounding efficiencies thereafter. I watched their faces on my screen. The Solvitech executives, 3 men in near-identical blue suits, were nodding along, completely unaware of what had just happened. Their CTO, Marcus Daniels, leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued by the numbers I'd just presented. "That's quite impressive, Isla," he said. "These projections seem ambitious, but your methodology is sound. I particularly appreciate the phased implementation approach." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through my veins. "We've found that gradual integration preserves institutional knowledge while allowing for necessary adjustments as we progress." I advanced to the final slide. My concluding remarks were memorized, a good thing. Since I could barely focus on the screen in front of me, the words, "termination of your employment," kept flashing in my mind like a neon sign. "Gentlemen, thank you for your time today. The team at Virelia Consulting is prepared to begin implementation immediately upon approval. I've included our proposed timeline in the materials sent over this morning, and of course, I'm available for any questions you might have." Questions came: technical ones about data migration, practical ones about staff training requirements. I answered each one with practiced precision, as if I hadn't just been fired in the middle of the most important presentation of the quarter, as if my world hadn't just been turned upside down in the span of a single sentence. When we finally ended the call 40 minutes later, Marcus's parting words were, "Well done, Isla. I think you've addressed all our concerns. We'll be in touch very soon to move forward." I closed my laptop, walked calmly to my kitchen sink, and threw up. After rinsing my mouth and splashing cold water on my face, I finally opened the email from HR. It was clinical, detached a form letter that could have been sent to anyone. "Organizational restructuring. Your position has been eliminated. 2 weeks severance. Return all company property. The usual corporate execution. Performed with bloodless efficiency." What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that they hadn't just fired an employee. They had fired the architect of their entire strategic framework. They'd fired the person who held the trust of their biggest potential client. They had, quite literally, fired the woman who knew where all the bodies were buried. They thought a simple email would erase my role in the company's success. They forgot one crucial detail: it wasn't the Virelia logo that Solvitech trusted, it was me. And as they quietly pushed me out of the game, I would quietly shift the entire playing field. My name is Isla Marin. I'm 38 years old, a strategic client director at Virelia Consulting, or rather, I was until about 40 minutes ago. I've spent the last 5 years building their enterprise division from a fledgling operation into a powerhouse that commands 7-figure contracts. I've brought in over $200 million in business. I've mentored junior consultants who now lead their own divisions. I've sacrificed weekends, relationships, and probably a few years of my life expectancy for this company. And they just fired me through a notification that popped up during a client presentation. I poured myself 3 fingers of the 12-year Macallan I'd been saving for a special occasion. Getting fired certainly qualified. The scotch burned pleasantly on the way down, a physical sensation to anchor me as my mind raced through implications, possibilities, and plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Just heard. What the actual fuck, call me." Leo Marks had been Virelia's legal counsel until last year, when he'd decided corporate law was slowly killing his soul. He'd opened his own practice, focusing on small businesses and startups. We'd stayed close enough, that he'd been helping me with what I'd been calling my contingency plan, a plan that had just become very real. I texted back, "Meeting at Helvanta in 2 hours. Bring the incorporation papers." Then I called Dina. Dina Sharp picked up on the first ring. "Tell me they didn't." "They did," I confirmed. "Right in the middle of the Solvatech presentation." "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "How did they who does that?" "Apparently, Veralia does," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Are you still in—" "More than ever," she replied without hesitation. "What's the timeline now?" "We accelerate. Can you be at the office in 2 hours?" "I'll be there in 90 minutes with coffee and those disgusting protein bars you like." I smiled for the first time since seeing that notification. "This is why you're my favorite project manager." After hanging up, I opened my laptop again and stared at the Veralia logo on my screen. The stylized V that I'd proudly represented for years now looked different to me. Predatory, sharp-edged. I logged in for what would likely be the last time and began methodically downloading every document I had legal rights to my performance reviews, contracts I'd authored with the intellectual property clauses I'd insisted on, email threads documenting my contributions, and the strategy documents I'd created that bore my digital signature. I didn't need to take proprietary information. I didn't need to steal client lists or confidential data. Everything I needed was already in my head, protected by the very agreements I'd helped craft during my time at Veralia. They'd never imagined that the contractual protections they'd put in place for their consultants would someday be used against them. As I worked, I thought back to when this all began 2 months ago, when the first signs appeared that my position at Veralia was being undermined. It had started with a request from CEO Greg Thorne himself. "Isla, we need a comprehensive strategy for integrating our service lines. The board is pushing for a unified approach. Can you put something together?" I'd taken the assignment seriously, as I did everything, for 3 weeks. I'd worked late into the night drafting a 64-page integration plan that covered everything from organizational structure to performance metrics. It was detailed, innovative, and most importantly, implementable. I'd drawn on 5 years of institutional knowledge and client feedback to create something truly valuable. When I'd submitted it to Greg, his response had been enthusiastic. "This is exactly what we needed. I'm presenting this to the board next week." I'd expected to be part of that presentation. I wasn't invited. The following Monday, at the all-hands meeting, I watched as Simon Levant, the newly hired VP of Strategy, presented my plan as his own, slide after slide of my work, my ideas, my language all delivered in Simon's confident British accent, with Greg nodding approvingly beside him. I sat in stunned silence as colleagues congratulated Simon on his brilliant framework. Some even turned to me and said things like, "You'll have to work closely with Simon to implement this," not realizing they were speaking to the actual author. I could have spoken up. I could have raised my hand and pointed out that what Simon was presenting was my work. Down to the unique terminology I'd developed, I could have created a scene, demanded recognition, embarrassed both Simon and Greg in front of the entire company. Instead, I smiled and nodded and began planning my exit. That evening, I started a new folder on my personal cloud drive. I named it Helvanta Strategies. Then I called Leo and Dina. Over the next few weeks, the signs became clearer. I was gradually removed from internal working groups I had previously led. My name was scrubbed from documents I had created. New strategic initiatives were launched without my input, despite my obvious expertise. And then came Kendra, young, eager, fresh out of her MBA program. She'd been assigned to learn from me on the Solvatech project. I'd always enjoyed mentoring junior staff, so at first, I took her under my wing willingly. But it soon became apparent that Kendra wasn't there to learn, she was there to replace me. "Simon thinks it would be good if I lead the next Solvatech call," she told me one day, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just to get some experience, you know." "Of course," I'd replied smoothly. "Though you might want to review the technical specifications more thoroughly before you do. Marcus is detail-oriented and will expect you to know the integration points backward and forward." Kendra had nodded, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't ready, and she knew it. She'd been set up to fail by Simon, who clearly didn't understand the complexity of the Solvatech account. That night, I'd accelerated my contingency planning. I called Leo again. I need to know exactly what I can take with me when I leave. I told him. Legally speaking, any intellectual property you created that isn't explicitly covered by your employment contract, methodologies you developed independently, client relationships, if you didn't sign a non-solicit, your expertise, obviously. What about the integration strategy I developed, the one Simon is now claiming as his own? Leo had thought for a moment. Did you create it as part of your normal job duties? Greg specifically asked me to develop it outside my normal client work. And is there documentation of that request? I smiled. Email and a calendar invite describing the project. And did you use any proprietary Virelia frameworks or tools to create it? No, I developed the entire methodology myself, based on my previous experience and publicly available best practices. Leo had let out a low whistle. Then technically, you might have a claim to it, especially if you can prove Simon plagiarized your work. But that's a messy legal battle. What are you really trying to accomplish here? Isla. I'd considered the question carefully. I want to protect what's mine without burning bridges I don't need to burn. I want to leave on my terms, not theirs. And I want to take the clients who trust me with me when I go. Then we need to be strategic about this, Leo had said, and I could hear him shifting into legal mode. Let me draft some documents for your review. The following weeks had been a careful dance. I continued performing at my usual exceptional level at Virelia, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for Helvanta, Dina, who had left Virelia 6 months earlier after her own conflicts with senior management, secured office space in a co-working facility. Leo finalized our incorporation papers and drafted client agreements that would protect our interests without triggering non-compete issues. I maintained detailed records of every interaction at Virelia, especially any that showed Simon or others taking credit for my work. I carefully backed up all communications with Solvatech, documenting how I had built the relationship from initial contact to near closing. And I watched as Kendra floundered in the role they were grooming her for, feeling a mixture of sympathy for her position and vindication of my own value. The final piece had fallen into place just last week, when I'd convinced Marcus from Solvatech to push the contract signing back by 2 weeks, citing some integration details I wanted to refine. In reality, I needed time to finalize Helvanta's operational capacity. I trust your judgment on this, Isla, Marcus had said. If you think we need more time to get the details right, we'll wait. That trust would prove invaluable now. 2 hours after being fired, I walked into a sparsely furnished office suite in a modern building 20 blocks from Virelia's headquarters. The sign on the door read, Helvanta Strategies, in a clean, professional font. Dina was already there, as promised, with coffee and protein bars laid out on the conference table alongside 3 laptops and a stack of folders. You look surprisingly put together for someone who just got fired, she observed as I set my bag down. I've had 2 months to prepare for this moment, I replied, though I didn't expect it to happen quite so dramatically. Their timing was impeccable, Dina agreed dryly, almost as if they wanted to sabotage the Solvatech deal. I don't think they're that strategic, I said, booting up one of the laptops. More likely, Simon convinced Greg that he could handle Solvatech without me, and they wanted to make the change before the contract was signed so the commission would go to him. Short-sighted, Dina muttered. And now it's going to cost them $74 million, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Leo arrived 10 minutes later, carrying a leather portfolio and looking every inch the successful attorney in his tailored suit. I filed the final paperwork this morning, he announced, spreading documents across the table. Helvanta Strategies is officially a registered business entity. You're now the CEO of your own consulting firm, Isla. I stared at the incorporation papers, feeling a surreal mix of emotions: vindication, anxiety, excitement, and a strange sense of calm. This was always where I had been headed, Virelia had just accelerated the timeline. "What's our first move?" Dina asked, her project manager brain already mapping out action items. "We contact Solvatech," I said decisively. "Not to poach them that could create legal issues, but to inform them professionally of my change in employment status." Leo nodded approvingly. "Keep it simple, non-disparaging, and factual." I drafted an email to Marcus Daniels, Solvatech's CTO. "Dear Marcus, I wanted to inform you personally that as of today, I am no longer employed by Virelia Consulting. It has been a pleasure working with you and the Solvatech team over these past months, and I wish you success with your integration project. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at my new contact information below. Best regards, Isla Marin, CEO, Helvanta Strategies." I included my new email address and phone number, but no pitch, no attempt to win their business, nothing that could be construed as solicitation, just a professional courtesy notification. "Perfect," Leo said after reviewing it. "Factual, courteous, and it puts the ball entirely in their court." I hit send, then turned to the more immediate tasks at hand. Dina had already created a project plan for our first 30 days as a functioning business, including everything from setting up our financial systems to finalizing our service offerings. We worked steadily through the afternoon, setting up the infrastructure that would support our operations. 2 hours after I sent the email, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Isla," he said when I answered, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "I just got your email. What happened?" "Organizational restructuring," I replied neutrally. "These things happen in consulting. On the same day you were presenting the final proposal to us, that seems unusual." I thought so too. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him thinking. "We were very impressed with your presentation today," he finally said. "The team has some concerns about moving forward without your involvement." "I understand. I'm sure Virelia has capable people who can manage the implementation." Another pause. "Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow just to discuss the situation?" "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone professional despite the surge of triumph I felt. "I'm available any time that works for your team." "Let's say 10 a.m. I'll send you a calendar invite." He hesitated, then added, "And Isla. For what it's worth, I think Virelia made a serious mistake today." After we hung up, I looked at Dina and Leo, who had been watching my side of the conversation with barely contained anticipation. "Solvatech wants to meet tomorrow," I told them. "They have concerns about moving forward without my involvement." Dina pumped her fist in the air. "Yes, first client in the bag." "Not yet," I cautioned. "They might just want reassurance before signing with Virelia, but it's a foot in the door." "It's more than that," Leo said thoughtfully. "They trust you, not the company. That's invaluable." By the end of the day, we had our basic systems in place, our initial marketing materials drafted, and a clear action plan for the coming weeks. As we were preparing to leave, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Simon Levant. "Isla, I've just been informed of your separation from Virelia. While unfortunate, these decisions are necessary for the company's strategic direction. I'll be taking over the Solvatech account effective immediately. Please forward any relevant materials to ensure a smooth transition. Regards, Simon Levant, VP of Strategy, Virelia Consulting." I showed the email to Leo and Dina. "The audacity," Dina muttered. "He fires you and then expects you to help him." "Forward any relevant materials," Leo repeated with a snort. "I'm pretty sure your employment termination means you're not obligated to do anything of the sort." I typed a brief reply. "Simon, as my employment was terminated effective immediately, I no longer have access to Virelia systems or materials. All Solvatech documentation should be available on the shared drive. Isla Marin." I hit send, then looked at my colleagues. Day 1 of Helvanta Strategies is officially complete. Tomorrow, we start building our future. As I drove home that evening, I felt a curious lightness. The anger and shock of the morning had transformed into something else: determination. Yes, but also a sense of freedom, For 5 years, I had poured my energy and creativity into building someone else's company. Now, every ounce of effort would go toward building my own. My apartment felt different when I returned, not physically changed, but somehow altered in its meaning. This was no longer just the place I collapsed after long days making money for Virilia. It was now the home of a CEO, a founder, an entrepreneur. I poured another finger of scotch and stood by my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was the Virilia office, where Simon was probably panicking about the Solvatech presentation he would now have to give, without my notes, without my relationships, without my understanding of their needs. I didn't wish him failure, not exactly, but I did feel a certain satisfaction knowing that he was about to discover just how much value he had casually discarded. My phone rang again, a Virilia number I didn't recognize. "Isla, it's Kendra." Her voice was hesitant, almost frightened. I softened my tone. "Hi, Kendra. How are you holding up?" I didn't know they were going to fire you," she blurted out. "Simon told me I was learning from you to expand the team, not to replace you. I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I said, and I did. Kendra had been a pawn in this game, just as I had been. "It's not your fault. They've assigned me the Solvatech account," she continued, her voice slightly frantic. "Simon says I need to be ready to lead the implementation meeting next week. But Isla, I don't understand half of the integration framework you designed. I don't think I can do this." I closed my eyes, feeling a momentary pang of sympathy for her. "What do you want me to say?" "Kendra, I can't help you implement the project. I don't work there anymore." I know, she said quickly. I guess I wanted to apologize, and to ask if you have any advice." I considered for a moment. Kendra wasn't my enemy. She was just a young consultant caught in corporate politics beyond her control. My advice: document everything, get written instructions and approvals for every decision, and start updating your resume. Because when this implementation fails, and it will, because Simon doesn't understand the methodology and you don't have the experience, they'll be looking for someone to blame. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a small voice, "Do you think, would your new company be hiring anytime soon?" I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Send me your resume. Kendra, I can't make any promises, but I always appreciate loyalty, especially when it's offered before it's needed." After we hung up, I felt strangely energized. The piece I'd been missing in my planning was inside information about Virilia's next moves. Kendra might prove to be an unexpectedly valuable connection. The meeting with Solvatech the next morning exceeded all my expectations. Marcus had brought not only his technical team, but also their CFO, a clear signal that financial decisions were on the table. "Let me be direct, Isla," Marcus said after preliminary pleasantries. "We selected Virilia largely because of you. The methodology you developed for our integration is exactly what we need. And frankly, we don't have confidence that anyone else there fully understands it." I nodded but remained neutral. "I appreciate your confidence in my work." "We've put the contract signing with Virilia on hold," the CFO interjected. "We're evaluating our options." This was the moment. I could push, make my pitch, try to convince them to sign with my fledgling company instead. But that wasn't my style. Instead, I asked a question. "What would make you feel confident moving forward with this integration, regardless of which firm you choose?" Marcus and the CFO exchanged glances. "Continuity," Marcus said firmly. "The person who designed the methodology needs to oversee its implementation. The approach you've outlined is too nuanced for a handoff." I nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concern. Methodological integrity is crucial for a project of this complexity." "Isla," the CFO said, leaning forward slightly, "I think what we're trying to ask is, would your new firm be capable of handling this project?" And there it was, the opening I needed, offered freely without any solicitation on my part. I smiled. Helvanta Strategies was established specifically to implement the kind of integrated approach I presented to you. We're a small but highly specialized firm with expertise in exactly this type of enterprise integration. For the next hour, I outlined Helvanta's capabilities, our implementation approach, and our pricing structure, which, I noted, would be 15% lower than Virelia's proposal, since we had significantly lower overhead. By the end of the meeting, we had the framework of an agreement. Solvatech would formally terminate their discussions with Virelia and engage Helvanta for the integration project, with work to begin in 2 weeks. As we were wrapping up, Marcus asked the question I'd been expecting. Aren't you concerned about legal issues with Virelia non-competes or client solicitation problems? I smiled. I appreciate your concern. Marcus, rest assured, I've taken all necessary precautions. The methodology I developed is my own intellectual property, and I was careful not to solicit your business. You came to me, but I understand if that creates hesitation on your part. Not hesitation, he clarified. Just due diligence. We don't want to start this project under a legal cloud. Understandable. My attorney would be happy to provide documentation addressing any concerns your legal team might have. When I returned to the Helvanta office after the meeting, Dina was waiting expectantly. Well, she demanded as soon as I walked through the door. I allowed myself a genuine smile. We have our first client, $74 million over 3 years. Dina whooped and threw her arms around me in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. I knew it. I knew they wouldn't sign with Virelia without you. We still have a lot of work to do, I cautioned, though I couldn't keep the satisfaction from my voice. We need to staff up quickly, formalize the contract, and prepare for implementation. Already on it, she said, gesturing to her laptop where a project plan was displayed. I've identified 5 potential consultants we can bring on as contractors initially, all former Virelia employees who left because of similar political issues. Perfect, I said, setting down my bag and feeling, for the first time, like this crazy plan might actually work. Let's get them in for interviews immediately. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Simon is freaking out. Solvatech just canceled tomorrow's contract signing meeting with no explanation. Thought you should know. K. I showed the message to Dina, who grinned wickedly. How long before they figure it out? Do you think? Not long, I predicted. Virelia may have problems, but they're not stupid. Sure enough, my phone rang 20 minutes later. Greg Thorne, Virelia's CEO. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided direct confrontation was better. I put the call on speaker so Dina could hear. Hello, Greg, I said calmly. What the hell did you do? Isla, he demanded, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. I'm not sure what you're referring to, I replied, my voice deliberately neutral. Solvatech just pulled out of a $74 million deal that was all but signed. The same day you get terminated. That's one hell of a coincidence. Perhaps they had concerns about the project implementation, I suggested mildly. Greg's voice turned cold. Did you contact them? Because if you violated your non-solicitation agreement... I sent a professional courtesy email informing them that I was no longer with Virelia. I interrupted. That's standard practice when client relationships change. I made no attempt to solicit their business. But they're signing with you now, aren't they? He accused. I'm not at liberty to discuss my client relationships. Greg, just as I never discussed Virelia's client relationships with outside parties when I worked for you, I could practically hear him seething through the phone. This isn't over. Isla, our legal team will be reviewing all your contractual obligations. They're welcome to do so, I replied calmly. I've already done the same, with my attorney. You'll find everything in order. After a few more thinly veiled threats, Greg hung up. Dina looked at me with admiration. That was ice cold, she said. I don't think I've ever heard you sound so calm while someone was threatening you. I shrugged. When you know you're in the right, it's easy to stay calm. But the truth was more complicated. Inside, I was a mess of emotions vindication. Yes, but also lingering anger, anxiety about the future, and a strange sort of grief for the career I'd built at Virelia. 5 years of my life, gone in an instant, with nothing but a form email to show for it. Still, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that my value was being recognized not by Virelia, which had taken me for granted, but by the clients who understood what I brought to the table. Over the next 2 weeks, Helvanta strategies took shape with remarkable speed. We hired 3 senior consultants, all with complementary expertise to mine. We finalized the Solvatech contract, with favorable terms that reflected their eagerness to work with us. We set up our systems, refined our methodology, and began preparing for implementation. And all the while, I received regular updates from Kendra about the chaos unfolding at Veralia. Simon tried to present